It only takes one careless sentence to reveal who truly understands the value of another human being. The applause echoed through the grand ballroom of the Bennett Foundation as cameras flashed beneath sparkling chandeliers and hundreds of business leaders gathered to celebrate another year of charitable giving. Waiters moved gracefully between polished tables covered in white linen, while a string quartet filled the air with quiet elegance. At the center of the room stood Victoria Bennett, the celebrated chief executive officer whose success had become the envy of the corporate world. Every guest seemed eager for a handshake, a photograph, or a moment of her attention. She carried herself with effortless confidence, believing every detail of the evening had been carefully planned. Across the crowded ballroom, Nathan Carter hurried through the entrance holding the hand of his 8-year-old daughter, Emma. She wore a neatly pressed blue dress and clutched a handmade thank you card she had spent the entire week creating for the foundation that had donated books to her elementary school. Nathan had come straight from work, his clean but well-worn flannel shirt and faded jeans standing in quiet contrast to the expensive suits surrounding him. His only concern was making sure Emma arrived on time to present her card before the ceremony began. "Daddy, I do not want to be late," Emma whispered. Nathan smiled gently. "We will make it, sweetheart." As they carefully moved between the guests, Emma suddenly stumbled when the strap of her small shoe caught against the edge of the carpet. Nathan instinctively reached to steady her, but his shoulder lightly brushed a catering cart waiting beside the aisle. A stack of presentation folders slid onto the polished floor, scattering neatly organized documents across the ballroom. Conversations immediately stopped. Several heads turned at once. Victoria slowly looked down at the papers before lifting her eyes toward Nathan. Her expression hardened. "Unbelievable," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Some people bring disorder everywhere they go." An uncomfortable silence spread across the room. Nathan immediately knelt beside the scattered folders and began gathering every page with calm, steady hands. "I am very sorry," he said sincerely. "It was an accident." Victoria crossed her arms, disappointment replacing courtesy. Accidents happen when people refuse to pay attention. A few executives exchanged awkward glances. Others quietly looked away. Emma's eyes filled with embarrassment as she helped her father collect the remaining papers. Nathan gently smiled at his daughter before handing the perfectly organized folders back to the event coordinator. "Everything is still in order," he said softly. The coordinator nodded with grateful relief, but Victoria had already turned toward the stage, dismissing the moment as though it no longer deserved another thought. Nathan placed a comforting hand on Emma's shoulder. "It is all right," he whispered. "Kindness is more important than pride." Emma nodded bravely, holding tighter to her handmade card. From the balcony above, an elderly gentleman wearing a simple gray suit watched the entire exchange without saying a word. His thoughtful eyes followed Nathan as father and daughter quietly took seats near the back of the ballroom. Unlike everyone else, he did not see an ordinary single father making a simple mistake. He saw a man he recognized from a very different chapter of life. And as the evening continued beneath the glittering lights, he realized the successful woman standing proudly at the podium had no idea that the quiet father she had just humiliated possessed a truth capable of changing everything she believed about success, dignity, and the people she thought she understood. Nathan Carter quietly slipped out of the ballroom with Emma before the ceremony ended, never looking back toward the stage where applause continued to echo beneath the crystal chandeliers. The cool evening air greeted them as they stepped onto the sidewalk outside the downtown convention center. Emma held her handmade thank you card close against her chest, its colorful edges now slightly bent after the unexpected accident. For several blocks, neither of them spoke. The city lights shimmered across the wet pavement after a brief autumn drizzle, and passing traffic filled the silence with a steady rhythm that somehow made the world feel calmer again. Finally, Emma looked up at her father. "Daddy, was the lady angry because of me?" Nathan immediately stopped walking and knelt so they were eye level. He smiled with the same quiet warmth that had carried them through far more difficult days than this one. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes people are carrying burdens we cannot see. We should never answer frustration with more frustration." Emma studied his face for a moment before giving a small nod. "I still wanted to give her my card." Nathan gently straightened the folded paper in her hands. Then we will find another way to thank the people who helped your school. Kindness does not disappear just because one moment goes wrong. 20 minutes later, they arrived at the small white farmhouse they called home on the edge of Cedar Ridge. The porch light glowed warmly against the gathering darkness, and a wooden swing moved gently in the evening breeze. Their home was modest but filled with care. Fresh flowers grew beside the front steps. A neatly painted mailbox stood near the gravel driveway. Inside, family photographs lined the hallway, preserving memories of birthdays, camping trips, and one smiling woman whose presence still quietly filled every room. Nathan prepared grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, while Emma finished her homework at the kitchen table. Soft country music played from an old radio resting beside the refrigerator. The smell of toasted bread and warm soup slowly replaced the heaviness left behind by the evening's embarrassment. After dinner, Nathan helped Emma practice reading aloud from her favorite library book before carefully checking her math assignment. "You always make everything feel better," Emma said as she packed her backpack for school. Nathan laughed softly. "I cannot fix everything. You always try," she answered with complete confidence. Those simple words lingered long after Emma had gone upstairs to bed. Later that night, Nathan sat alone on the front porch with a mug of coffee cooling in his hands. The stars stretched clearly across the Colorado sky while crickets sang from the nearby fields. He quietly opened an old notebook resting beside his chair. Inside were carefully organized pages of handwritten technical sketches, engineering calculations, and design ideas he still worked on during peaceful evenings after Emma fell asleep. He never spoke about them to anyone. They belonged to another chapter of his life, one he had willingly left behind without regret. Inside the ballroom across town, Victoria Bennett accepted another standing ovation while photographers captured every smiling moment. Yet from a balcony near the back of the room, the elderly gentleman in the gray suit remained unusually thoughtful. He had recognized Nathan immediately, and the memory refused to leave him. Before leaving the event, he quietly approached one of Victoria's senior executives and asked a single unexpected question. "Does your chief executive officer know who that father really is?" The executive frowned in confusion. Should she? The older man looked back toward the stage where Victoria stood proudly accepting another award. "Not yet," he replied quietly. "But very soon she is going to wish she had listened instead of judging." Monday morning arrived with bright sunshine spilling across the glass towers of Bennett Industries. But inside the executive conference room, the atmosphere felt unusually heavy. Victoria Bennett stood at the head of a polished walnut table surrounded by senior executives, legal advisors, and engineering consultants. The room overlooked downtown Denver through floor-to-ceiling windows, yet no one seemed interested in the breathtaking view. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on a large presentation screen displaying the company's newest community technology initiative, a nationwide education program designed to provide advanced engineering laboratories for underserved public schools. It was the largest charitable investment Bennett Industries had ever announced, and the board expected final approval before the national press conference scheduled for Friday. Everything had appeared ready until one unexpected problem stopped the entire project. A specialized technical framework donated by an outside research partner contained critical engineering documentation that nobody inside the company fully understood. Without completing the final integration, the laboratories could not be safely installed, federal certification would be delayed, and dozens of school districts would lose funding before the next academic year. Victoria folded her arms while reviewing another disappointing report. "How long have we been trying to solve this?" she asked calmly. The chief engineering director sighed before answering. "Almost 6 weeks. And no solution?" "Not yet." Another consultant adjusted his glasses and pointed toward the screen. "The original architect who designed this framework left the project years ago. His methods were highly unconventional. We have every document he submitted, but we still cannot understand the reasoning behind several critical decisions." Victoria remained composed, although quiet frustration slowly settled across her expression. "Find him." The room became silent. One executive cleared his throat. "We have tried. Every professional record simply ends several years ago. No current employer. No consulting contracts. No public appearances." Victoria walked toward the window, watching morning traffic move steadily below. "Everyone leaves a trail," she said confidently. Someone knows where he is. Across town, Nathan Carter spent the same morning replacing brake pads on an elderly customer's sedan inside his small neighborhood garage. The familiar scent of motor oil, fresh coffee, and cut lumber filled the workshop, while classic country music played softly from an old radio resting above the tool cabinet. Emma sat comfortably in a corner after school, coloring pictures while occasionally looking up to watch her father work with patient concentration. Every customer received the same respectful greeting, whether they drove an aging pickup truck or a brand-new luxury vehicle. Around noon, an older gentleman wearing a neatly pressed gray suit quietly stepped through the open garage door. Nathan immediately recognized him from the charity gala. "Good afternoon," Nathan said warmly. "I remember seeing you the other night." The gentleman smiled kindly. "Professor Harold Whitmore," he replied, extending his hand. "It has been many years, Nathan." Emma looked curiously between the two men. Nathan returned the handshake with genuine surprise. "Professor Whitmore, I did not expect to see you here." The professor glanced around the modest garage before looking back at Nathan with quiet admiration. "I was hoping I would. There is something important you should know." Nathan invited him into the small office where sunlight streamed across an old wooden desk covered with repair invoices, family photographs, and the same engineering notebook he quietly guarded every evening. As Professor Whitmore noticed the familiar handwritten calculations resting beside the paperwork, he smiled gently to himself. Some extraordinary gifts, he realized, never truly disappear. They simply wait patiently until the world is finally ready to recognize them again. Professor Harold Whitmore waited until Emma stepped outside to water the small flower boxes beneath the front window before speaking again. The quiet office smelled faintly of fresh coffee, engine oil, and old pine shelves worn smooth by years of honest work. Sunlight rested across Nathan Carter's engineering notebook, illuminating pages of precise sketches that looked far more at home inside a research laboratory than a neighborhood repair garage. Professor Whitmore gently turned a page before looking up with a knowing smile. "You never stop thinking like an engineer," he said softly. Nathan shrugged with quiet humility. "Thinking costs nothing." The professor laughed gently. "That answer sounds exactly like the young man I taught years ago." Nathan leaned back in his chair. "Why are you really here, Professor?" Harold folded his hands together. "Because Bennett Industries is in serious trouble, and I believe they are searching for the wrong solution." Nathan remained silent. "Their education initiative depends on a technical framework almost nobody understands anymore," Harold continued. "The irony is that the only person who truly understands it is sitting across from me." Nathan lowered his eyes for a brief moment before closing the notebook. "There are many talented engineers." Harold slowly shook his head. "Not this time." Nathan stood and walked toward the open garage door where Emma was smiling as she carefully watered bright yellow flowers planted beside the porch. He watched her quietly before speaking. "My life is here now." "I know," Harold answered. "I am not asking you to return to your old career." Nathan looked back toward him. "Then what are you asking?" "Simply to prevent thousands of children from losing something they have already been promised." Those words lingered in the air. Nathan understood immediately that this was no longer about corporations, executive titles, or professional recognition. It was about students waiting for opportunities they might never receive if the project failed. Later that afternoon, Professor Whitmore arranged a private meeting at Bennett Industries. Nathan agreed only to look at the technical documents and offer an honest opinion. He made one condition before leaving the garage. "I need to pick Emma up from school at 3:15. No matter what happens, I leave by 3. Harold smiled warmly. Some priorities should never change. Less than an hour later, they entered the engineering center where dozens of specialists surrounded enormous digital displays filled with diagrams and calculations. Victoria Bennett looked genuinely surprised when she saw Nathan walk through the glass doors. For a brief moment, the memory of the charity gala crossed her face before professionalism returned. "Mr. Carter," she said politely, "I was not expecting to see you here." Nathan nodded respectfully. "Neither was I." Harold placed a thick binder of technical documents on the conference table. He agreed to take one look. Several engineers exchanged doubtful glances. One quietly whispered, "A mechanic?" Another forced a polite smile. Nathan ignored every comment. He calmly opened the binder, studied the first engineering schematic, then the second, before reaching the final integration diagram. The room remained completely silent except for the soft hum of computer servers. After only a few minutes, Nathan reached for a pencil lying beside the conference table. Without hesitation, he circled one small section near the center of the blueprint and drew a single clean line connecting two isolated systems. Then he quietly pushed the binder back across the table. "Your framework is not incomplete," he said calmly. "It is waiting for a connection that everyone has been looking past." Every engineer leaned forward at once. Victoria stared at the simple pencil mark, suddenly realizing that the man she had dismissed only days earlier might have just seen what an entire room of experts had missed. Every conversation inside the engineering center stopped as Nathan Carter quietly stepped away from the conference table and placed the pencil exactly where he had found it. He had not delivered a dramatic speech or attempted to impress anyone. He had simply drawn one connecting line across a complicated technical framework, then folded his hands as though the answer had always been obvious. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Finally, the lead systems engineer leaned over the blueprint with a puzzled expression. "Run the integration again," he said cautiously. A younger engineer quickly entered the revised sequence into the simulation software, while dozens of specialists gathered around the massive display wall. The processors began cycling through thousands of calculations every second. Status indicators that had remained frozen for weeks suddenly changed from yellow to green one after another. Communication pathways synchronized perfectly. Data flowed smoothly across every subsystem without interruption. The room became so quiet that the gentle hum of the computer servers sounded almost loud. Another engineer repeated the simulation using an entirely different testing environment. The results were identical. A third engineer performed an independent verification. Once again, every system passed. The lead systems engineer slowly removed his glasses and looked back at the blueprint lying on the table. "That is impossible," he whispered. Professor Harold Whitmore smiled gently. "No," he replied. "It is simply Nathan." Victoria Bennett stepped closer to the technical display, carefully comparing the revised diagram with the original design documents. "How did you know where to look?" she asked quietly. Nathan answered without pride. "Because the framework was never designed to separate technology from people. It was designed to connect them." Everyone kept analyzing the equations. Nobody asked why the equations were written that way. Several engineers exchanged thoughtful glances. The explanation sounded remarkably simple, yet none of them had considered it during 6 frustrating weeks of analysis. Professor Whitmore looked around the room before speaking in a calm voice. "There is something all of you deserve to know." Every eye turned toward him. 15 years ago, this framework began as a graduate research project. Most people remember the organization that funded it. Very few remember the young engineer who created its original architecture before donating the intellectual property for public education. Victoria looked from the professor to Nathan, her expression slowly changing from curiosity to disbelief. Harold continued, "That engineer is standing right here." Complete silence settled over the room. Nathan lowered his eyes, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden attention. One senior executive quietly opened the project's original archive on his tablet. After a few moments, his breathing caught. "The initials," he murmured. "NC." He looked up slowly. "Nathan Carter." Professor Whitmore nodded. He refused personal recognition because he believed educational opportunities should belong to children, not to individual reputations. Victoria felt the memory of the charity gala return with painful clarity. She remembered the scattered folders, the quiet apology, and the careless words she had spoken in front of everyone. The man she had judged by his clothes and circumstances had never defended himself because he had never needed to. His character had already spoken far louder than any title ever could. Nathan glanced at the clock mounted above the engineering center entrance. It read 3 o'clock. He smiled politely, gathered his worn notebook, and quietly closed the binder. "If there are no more questions," he said warmly, "I should leave soon. My daughter finishes school in 15 minutes, and I promised I would be there, waiting when she walks outside." Not a single person in the room attempted to stop him, because at that moment every one of them understood they were standing in the presence of a man whose greatest achievement was never the brilliance of his mind, but the faithfulness of his heart. The following Friday afternoon, sunlight poured through the towering glass windows of Bennett Industries as employees, school principals, community leaders, and reporters gathered once again inside the company's grand atrium. The education initiative that had nearly collapsed only days before was now ready to launch, and hundreds of children from local school districts filled the front rows with hopeful excitement. Yet before the ceremony began, Victoria Bennett quietly stepped away from the prepared speech resting on the podium. She looked across the audience until her eyes found Nathan Carter standing near the back beside Emma, who still held the same handmade thank you card she had been too embarrassed to deliver at the charity gala. Nathan had planned to remain unnoticed, but Victoria gently walked away from the stage and crossed the polished floor toward him. Every conversation slowly faded into silence as cameras instinctively followed her. She stopped only a few feet away and met his calm eyes. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then Victoria took a slow breath. "Mr. Carter," she said softly enough for the entire room to hear, "before we celebrate this project, there is something I should have said days ago." She turned toward the audience without stepping away from him. "Last week, I judged a man without knowing his story. I believed appearance could tell me everything I needed to know about character. I was wrong." The room remained completely still. "I embarrassed a father who responded with patience instead of anger. I dismissed a man whose kindness protected opportunities for thousands of children. I underestimated someone who chose humility over recognition and family over personal success." She looked back at Nathan. "I am deeply sorry." Nathan smiled with quiet grace, the same gentle expression Emma saw every evening at home. "Thank you," he replied. "An apology has value because it gives both people a chance to move forward." Victoria nodded, visibly relieved. She then invited Emma to join them. The little girl walked forward shyly, still holding the colorful card she had carefully made with crayons and glitter. "I think this belongs to you," Emma said with a hopeful smile as she handed it to Victoria. Victoria accepted it with both hands, studying every handwritten word and every carefully drawn flower across the front. Her eyes glistened as she read the simple message inside. "Thank you for helping children dream bigger." She closed the card gently and smiled at Emma. "This is the most meaningful gift I have received all year." A warm wave of applause spread naturally through the atrium, not because anyone had asked for it, but because everyone had witnessed something far more powerful than a business announcement. They had watched pride give way to humility and misunderstanding become respect. Victoria stepped back to the podium one final time. "Today this initiative officially begins," she announced, "and every future engineering laboratory will include a simple inscription that reminds students what truly builds great ideas." Moments later, a bronze plaque was unveiled beside the stage. It carried only a few carefully chosen words. "Built with knowledge, guided by kindness, strengthened by humility." Nathan quietly squeezed Emma's hand as she looked up at him with pride. "Daddy," she whispered, "I think people finally know who you really are." Nathan smiled gently and looked around at the children laughing together beneath the afternoon sunlight. "The important thing," he answered softly, "is that they know who they can become." Victoria stood silently watching father and daughter walk toward the exit together, their shadows stretching across the polished floor, and for the first time in many years she discovered that the greatest truth she had ever learned did not come from a boardroom, a balance sheet, or an award. It came from a quiet single father whose dignity had spoken long before his remarkable story ever did. Several weeks passed, and life settled into a peaceful rhythm once again. Autumn painted the trees surrounding Cedar Ridge with shades of gold and crimson, while cool morning air drifted through the open doors of Nathan Carter's small repair garage. The familiar sounds of ratchets clicking, engines humming, and neighbors exchanging cheerful greetings filled each day with quiet purpose. Nothing about Nathan's routine had changed after the ceremony at Bennett Industries. He still opened the garage before sunrise. He still greeted every customer by name. He still closed the shop every afternoon with enough time to stand outside Emma's elementary school before the final bell rang. Recognition had come, but it had never become his destination. One crisp Saturday morning, a dark blue sedan rolled slowly into the parking lot. Nathan looked up from replacing a worn alternator and immediately recognized Victoria Bennett stepping out of the driver's seat. This time there were no cameras waiting nearby, no executives following behind her, and no carefully rehearsed speeches. She wore simple jeans, a cream-colored sweater, and carried a cardboard box in both hands. Emma looked up from the picnic table where she was finishing a science project and smiled brightly. "Hello, Miss Bennett." Victoria returned the smile with genuine warmth. "Hello, Emma. I brought something I hope both of you would like." Nathan walked over, wiping his hands with a clean shop towel. "Good morning." Victoria placed the box gently on the workbench and opened the lid. Inside were dozens of brand-new engineering textbooks, model construction kits, measuring tools, and educational materials designed for children who loved building things with their hands. "The first shipment arrived yesterday," she explained. "The Community Education Board approved a permanent weekend engineering program here in Cedar Ridge." Nathan looked at the materials with quiet surprise. "Here." Victoria nodded. "After meeting with local teachers, we realized something important. Children learn best from people they admire, not just people with impressive titles." Emma carefully lifted one of the beginner engineering kits from the box. "Does this mean more kids get to learn here with Daddy?" Victoria smiled. "If your father agrees." Nathan remained silent for a moment, looking around the modest garage that had become a second home for so many neighbors over the years. "I have never taught a class," he admitted. Professor Harold Whitmore, who had quietly stepped through the garage door moments earlier, chuckled warmly. "You have been teaching your entire life, Nathan. You simply never called it that." Everyone laughed softly. Over the following months, every Saturday morning the garage became something far greater than a repair shop. Teenagers gathered around workbenches learning how engines worked, how simple mechanical systems solved complicated problems, and why patience mattered just as much as intelligence. Nathan never began a lesson by discussing his accomplishments. Instead, he always asked the same question. Who can tell me why helping someone matters more than impressing someone? The students gradually discovered that every engineering principle reflected a deeper lesson about responsibility, honesty, and perseverance. Victoria visited often, sometimes bringing new equipment, sometimes simply sitting quietly in the back of the garage listening as Nathan patiently encouraged every student to believe in their own potential. Watching him teach, she finally understood what had made him extraordinary all along. It had never been his remarkable knowledge alone. It was his ability to make every person standing in front of him believe they were capable of becoming something greater than they had imagined for themselves. Winter arrived quietly in Cedar Ridge, covering the rooftops with a light blanket of snow that sparkled beneath the morning sun. Inside Nathan Carter's garage, the warmth of hard work and friendly conversation welcomed everyone who stepped through the old wooden doors. The Saturday engineering workshops had become the heart of the community. Parents gathered with coffee in hand while teenagers eagerly assembled small engines, tested electrical circuits, and learned that every successful design began with patience instead of shortcuts. Emma proudly helped organize notebooks and measuring tools before each class, greeting every new student with the same bright smile that had once carried a handmade thank you card into a crowded ballroom. Nathan watched each young person with quiet encouragement, never raising his voice, never making anyone feel embarrassed for asking simple questions. Every expert was once a beginner, he often reminded them. The only mistake is believing you cannot learn. Those words gradually became the unofficial motto of the workshop. One snowy afternoon, Victoria Bennett arrived carrying a small stack of letters tied together with a blue ribbon. She found Nathan finishing a lesson about teamwork while students carefully cleaned their workstations before heading home. After the last family left, Victoria placed the letters on the workbench. "These came from schools across the state," she explained softly. Nathan untied the ribbon and slowly read the first few pages. One principal described students who had discovered a passion for engineering after visiting Cedar Ridge. Another teacher wrote about a quiet young girl who had built her first working model bridge because she finally believed she was smart enough to try. A father shared that his son had stopped saying he would never be good at science after spending one Saturday listening to Nathan explain that failure was simply another way to learn. Nathan carefully folded each letter with genuine gratitude. "They give too much credit to me," he said. Victoria gently shook her head. "No, they are thanking the person who gave children permission to believe in themselves." She paused before continuing. "I spent years believing leadership meant standing in front of people. You showed me it often means standing beside them." Nathan smiled quietly. "We all keep learning." Victoria looked around the garage where the walls now displayed photographs of smiling students beside their completed projects instead of awards or certificates. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "the board still asks me every few weeks whether you might reconsider joining Bennett Industries." Nathan laughed softly. "I suspected they might." "Have you changed your mind?" she asked with a hopeful smile. Nathan glanced through the open garage door where Emma was laughing with several students while helping them brush snow from their bicycles before they rode home together. Golden afternoon sunlight reflected across the fresh snow, filling the small town with a peaceful glow. "Every afternoon I get to watch my daughter grow into a kind young woman," he answered gently. "There is no office in the world with a better view than that." Victoria followed his eyes and smiled with complete understanding. She no longer saw a man who had walked away from opportunity. She saw someone who had chosen the opportunity that mattered most. As she prepared to leave, she quietly placed one final envelope on the workbench. It contained official approval for expanding the Cedar Ridge engineering program into neighboring communities, ensuring that thousands more children would benefit from the same lessons of knowledge, humility, and compassion. Nathan looked at the document, then back at the empty doorway where students had just disappeared into the snowy afternoon. Without seeking recognition, without asking for anything in return, he simply nodded and whispered, "Then let us make sure every child feels welcome." Spring returned to Cedar Ridge with gentle rain, fresh green hills, and wildflowers blooming beside quiet country roads. The little repair garage that had once been known only for honest workmanship had become something far greater without ever losing its original purpose. Every Saturday morning families arrived from neighboring towns, not because they expected miracles, but because they believed kindness and knowledge could still change lives. Children filled the workbenches with model engines, simple inventions, and hopeful questions while laughter drifted through the open garage doors with the warm breeze. Nathan Carter welcomed every student exactly the same way he welcomed every customer, with patience, respect, and the quiet confidence that every person deserved to be seen before they were judged. Emma, now taller and more confident than she had been only months before, proudly helped younger children understand projects that had once seemed impossible to her. Watching her encourage others reminded Nathan that the greatest lessons were never taught through speeches. They were passed from one generous heart to another. One Saturday afternoon, the entire community gathered outside the garage for the dedication of the expanded learning center that would now serve students across the region. Teachers, parents, mechanics, engineers, local business owners, and children stood together beneath clear blue skies while birds sang from the tall cottonwood trees surrounding the property. Victoria Bennett arrived quietly, no longer interested in making an entrance. She stood beside Professor Harold Whitmore as the mayor thanked everyone who had contributed to the project. When Nathan was invited to say a few words, he walked to the front with the same calm expression that had carried him through every challenge life had placed before him. He looked across the smiling faces before speaking softly. "People often believe success begins when someone finally notices you. I have learned something different. Success begins the moment you decide to notice someone else." The crowd became completely still. Every child deserves someone who believes in them before they believe in themselves. Every neighbor deserves kindness before judgment. Every stranger deserves respect before assumptions. His words settled gently over the audience like the warm spring sunlight. Nathan thanked the volunteers, the teachers, the families, and every student who had chosen courage over fear when learning something new. He never mentioned his own achievements. He never spoke about the awards, the recognition, or the opportunities he had declined. As the ceremony concluded, a simple stone monument near the entrance was unveiled. It carried only one quiet message. Character builds futures. Kindness changes lives. Dignity needs no applause. Victoria stood silently reading those words while remembering the evening she had mistaken humility for weakness. She realized the greatest truth she had ever discovered was not hidden inside a business strategy, a financial report, or an executive office. It had been standing quietly in front of her all along, disguised as an ordinary father holding his daughter's hand. Emma slipped her hand into Nathan's as they slowly walked home beneath the bright afternoon sky, surrounded by children laughing, neighbors waving, and students dreaming about futures they now believed were possible. The garage doors remained open behind them, welcoming whoever might arrive next with questions, hope, or simply the need for someone willing to listen. Long after the voices faded into the peaceful spring afternoon, one lesson remained in every heart that had witnessed their journey. True greatness never needs to announce itself. It quietly changes the world one act of grace, one promise kept, and one life lifted at a time. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories of courage, kindness, and second chances, because the people the world overlooks often leave the greatest impact.